What I want to work on today is a Lambda function that responds to a DynamoDB event, like an insert into the product table, meaning that an admin has created a new product. And when that happens, I want the Lambda function to call the Stripe API and generate a product ID and a price ID and return that, and then update the newly created product with those values. And then those values will be used later on when the user checks out, and there will be some integration between our app and the Stripe app. So rather than creating the product on the fly at the final step of checking out, this should provide a way for kind of a deeper integration. And the main reason is that it gives us a chance to try implementing DynamoDB streams and Lambda functions in Amplify Gen 2. So let's look at some code. And I think it makes sense to look at things from starting with the backend.ts file. So just to remind you, that backend.ts file is kind of what links all these things together: auth, data, functions, storage. So what I've done is imported Dynamo event source from the AWS CDK library, and I've imported my new function, which I'm calling create Stripe product function. I add the new function to the definition of the backend. Then I create a new event source, which is my product table. And I say the starting position is at the latest. So start reading just after the most recent record in the shard, so that you always read the most recent data in the shard. And then finally, look at the backend, the function, or our function that we added to the definition, its resources, Lambda, and call add event source, and then we put in the event source. Then I think it makes sense, in our functions, I have a functions directory, just like we have a data directory, auth directory, storage directory. We have a functions directory that I created. Auth and data were created by Amplify automatically when the product was created, or when the project was created. So in this create Stripe product, it's my function. It has a resource file, and it imports a define function and calls define function, giving it the name create Stripe product, and entry is an optional. Oh, sorry about the noise, man. Hang on 1 second. Sorry about noisy neighbors, but I'm not going to re-record this just because of some noise. The define function, you can provide an entry, but if your entry is called handler.ts, then you don't need to. And in this case, that's the case. So we just have create Stripe product. And here's our handler. And our handler is just going to log some information whenever an event it's going to log for any event, but it's in particular for insert events, it's going to print out into the log new image and then stringify the data in that event. So this is code that is copied verbatim from the Amplify documentation, which I'll link to in the description. Let's verify that our function is working by creating a product. Give it price of 333 and give it a image. So that should have created an event. And if we look over here now at our Lambda functions and then create Stripe product Lambda, we can take a look at the CloudWatch log. Look at that, and should see, take that. Yeah, there it is. So we see our information here, processing record, event type insert, and see the new product information. So it worked. That means we should feel confident in going ahead with trying out the next parts of the functionality. I ended the previous video on a confident note that seems a little bit naive now. This is a few days later. So I expected that I would be able here in my data/resource.ts file to be able to define a function, use the define function from the define function from Amplify backend, and specify my handler. And this is actually what I previously had, and then add this authorization to the schema and give my function, my Lambda function, access to the schema to do what it needed to do. And then in, let's see, go back to here, and then in my backend .ts file, I thought I could pass in my function to the defined backend, and have my event source, which is what it was before, and everything would work out fine. But it turned out that I ran into a problem that seems to be a common problem for Amplify Generation 2 right now, which is a circular dependency issue, and which the team is working on solving. But I needed a workaround, and fortunately the Amplify Discord group has lots of smart people who are facing the same kind of issues, and I got some help from them. The solution is basically to define the function outside of Amplify. So here's what I did. Here's backend.ts. Make sure this is big enough to see. Make it a little bit bigger. So here's my backend.ts. So rather than using define function to define my Lambda function, I am using Lambda function. Well, it's an alias for function, which comes from the AWS CDK. So I'm using this to define the function. I'm using this helper, which I'll talk about in a second. And it takes in the paths of the function and a build mode, you specify the runtime, and I passed in the product table name. Then we define the event source, add the event source to the Lambda function, attach an inline policy so that our Lambda function has access to the product table. That's right here. And it can get items and update items and do the other things it needs to do. The other thing we needed was the access to a Stripe secret key. Here you can see that I meant to call it secret key, but I accidentally called it secure key. But anyway, that's in the Stripe world, it's called Stripe secret key. And I'm storing that in the parameter store, AWS parameter store, and I wanted my function to be able to access that. So I attached an inline policy, an SSM policy, so that my function is able to, has permission to get the secret key, and by defining the function outside of the define function and outside of putting it here in define backend, we can avoid that circular dependency issue, which you can read about and possibly find solutions for it. So here in the GitHub repo for AWS Amplify, there's some tracking going on for circular dependency issues, and you can read about that. That's where, and in that repo, that's where I found the issue that was very similar to mine, or almost exactly the same as mine, and I found a helpful solution. You can read about that. I'll put the link in the description. The helper function is over here. I copied this verbatim from the repo. Some very smart person in the Amplify Discord group created this. I'm not going to go into it. I didn't change it at all. Basically, I didn't modify it at all. So you can specify a build mode, and if you specify an ES build, it will create your compile your function, transpile your function, and include all the dependencies. Like in my case, there were a number of dependencies that are not included in the Lambda runtime. The script is smart enough to skip things that are already available. So you can see that down here. Where is it? Yeah, so for instance, these things. AWS Lambda and AWS SDK. It's not going to build those into your file, but the other stuff it will. So let's now talk about this Lambda function. We don't need to see that. I think that's type's big enough. You might be watching this on your phone. Who knows? So I want to make the type big. So what do we want to do here? We need to get our Stripe secret. So I'm importing the, or I'm using the client SSM library and importing SSM client. Which I use here in get Stripe in the get Stripe secret key function. Misnamed it. Stripe secure key should be Stripe secret key. Decrypt the value. And we use that here in the get Stripe client function. So if we haven't already defined Stripe in the variable for this function, we get it. We just call the Stripe function from the Stripe library, get Stripe, get the Stripe client, and use it here in get Stripe product ID, where if you call Stripe products, the products API with the create command and pass in a name and a description, you will get yourself a Stripe product in response, and it will have a Stripe product ID. And with that Stripe product ID, you can call the Stripe prices API and use the create function, pass in your product ID, a unit amount in cents, so some integer representing cents, and a currency, and that will return a price ID. So then these things, now that you have them, so here on the insert event, we've got our basically the event that has just been created in our DynamoDB product table. You can unmarshal that to get an object that's a JavaScript object that's easy to work with, and that's where we call create Stripe product ID and create Stripe price ID. And finally, we can update the item in our database with these values. So let's look at that function. All right, so we give it the product ID. That is our own product ID. Stripe product ID, Stripe price ID. Set up this params object. We're providing the table name, the key using the Marshall function from the AWS CDK. Yeah, all that comes from SDK util Dynamo, so it comes from the utils. Tell it our update expression, sets the product ID field to the value that we're passing in, and the price ID to the value that we're passing in. Create a command, and then finally send it to our DynamoDB client. This part of it is pretty straightforward. It was the figuring out how to deal with the circular dependency that was the challenging part. But as I said, the Amplify Discord community is very helpful. So I would not hesitate to check in there and search as well in the Amplify GitHub, just to see if you run into anything, just see if someone has already run into that thing. So here's our app, and there's got a couple of products in there. KDKO, first product was Stripe. And if we look at the database, oops, here, this one, we can see we've got 2 products in there. I've already, so I recently created those. So these already have product IDs. They're Stripe price and product IDs. Functionally, from the user's point of view, this is not changed. We're just gonna and can stick in some semi-random picture. So nothing here has changed, but on the back end, if I update this, we see that now we have this new product, and it has the Stripe price ID and Stripe product ID. Already added. So that's the functionality that I wanted to show mainly today. I think the last thing we should look at is Stripe and verify that the integration is actually happening. So this is the Stripe dashboard, and I'm in test mode, and it's outside the scope of this video how to set up the dev account. To have good instructions and videos on how to do that, but the TLDR is once you as a developer have set up an account, you'll get a secret key, and that's what I used in my code. And here's a product catalog. So what we get by having this integration is some access to all the functionality that Stripe provides. And again, you can look into that if you don't already have experience with Stripe. But you can see this is the product we just created in my app, and it's got a description. I think you can also provide an icon photo. So there's a lot of interesting integration you can do, but just wanted to show you that, yep, it's here. I'm not sure what I'll work on next. Obviously, I'll have to build in functionality for updating a product on Stripe, and pretty soon we'll have to start implementing some automated testing. So there's a lot of work to do, and who knows what surprises Amplify Gen 2 will throw in the way. But should be interesting. Please leave comments and suggestions in the thing below the video. Take care. Have a good day.